Well, I hoped I wouldn't have to do this one, but who was I kidding? Peter Pan and Wendy. Yikes. Peter Pan and Wendy might be the worst adaptation of Peter Pan ever made, and I only use the word might because I haven't seen all of them. Sorry, but I blocked this one from memory, and that door is staying closed. But I think odds are good that I'm right about this one because, wow. I'm not saying the original animated movie has aged great. It hasn't. There are parts of it that need to stay in the past. The racist depiction of the Indian characters, for one. But there's a reason why this story is so timeless, and sadly, why Hollywood keeps trying to go back to the well with live-action versions. And since it's been a minute since we visited Neverland, and since Hollywood just can't stop rebooting classic franchises right now, I guess taking another stab at making J.M. Barrie roll over in his grave was inevitable. Only this time, it would be, quote-unquote, updated for modern audiences. Yeah. The trailer told you everything you needed to know because it hit all the wrong notes immediately. Wendy being added to the title, seemingly for no other reason than to drive home that she's been elevated to co-lead, of course. Multiple characters getting race-bent, and the Lost Boys now having girls in the group.
But you're not all boys. So?
Which we just had to point out in the trailer to show the audience how inclusive the new Peter Pan is, when really all it accomplished was showing how the filmmakers' politics were dictating all these changes, and that's what they wanted front and center more than anything that might, make people want to see the movie. Great idea. Yeah, it's not like there's a long storied track record of that not working out. I'm sure this'll be a slam dunk. And I'm not even complaining about that stuff, okay? In the grand scheme of things, those changes are not a big deal. And they're basically meaningless in the movie anyway, except for the Wendy thing. But they are representative of a larger problem in that so many of today's creatives, and I use that word loosely, are petulant, untalented, immature little jackasses. People who I previously dubbed cultural arsonists, who every time they sink their hooks into a pre-established IP, be it Gotham Knights, or The Witcher, or Velma, or Halo, or Star Wars, or Peter Pan, just can't resist f***ing with something that did not need to be f***ed with, and 99 times out of 100, just ruining it for everybody. Which, I gotta be honest, is starting to feel like the only reason why they do this shit anymore. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't try to update anything. Like the Indians? Yeah, they needed a fresh take. But when your first idea, and the one you put on full display in the marketing leading up to this thing, is changing characters' skin color and adding more girls just for the sake of adding more girls, all you're really doing is proving that you had no new ideas at all. None that were worth rebooting Peter Pan for the umpteenth time anyway. And I know this because the movie doesn't do a damn thing to justify making any of these changes. In fact, just about all the changes feel utterly pointless. Like putting girls in the Lost Boys, for example. On paper, there might be something to that. Now, Peter Pan to me always seemed like a kid right on the cusp of puberty, but not quite there yet. He still had that childhood innocence, but he was just old enough that he might have the tiniest bit of curiosity about what comes later in life, and if there was ever a reason that he might entertain the possibility of growing up, Wendy would be that reason. Wendy represented a temptation that Peter might think about, but maybe he couldn't quite make that leap. Different iterations have played around with this idea. And if you put girls in the Lost Boys, you could do something like that with them. Maybe they could be conflicted in similar but different ways. Maybe that's why some of them would choose to leave Neverland, or why some of them would choose to stay, and they could each have their own reasons for it. There are different types of stories you can mine from this that haven't been explored yet, that might justify putting girls in the Lost Boys, that might make this a worthwhile thing to do, but they don't do anything with it. Nothing is done with it at all. The Lost Boys just have girls in the group now because we wanted to show off how woke we are. We wanted to be able to point out how inclusive we are in the trailer, only for it to be a completely pointless addition in the actual movie. That scene from the trailer is literally the only time this change is ever referenced in the film. And it cuts right out too. It wasn't done for creative reasons, because they never bothered with any of those. So can you really blame people for complaining about this when you could have done something, anything, to prove this was an update worth making, but you didn't didn't even bother. It was so nakedly obvious why you did this, and you can't change something just for the politics of it and then get butthurt when the audience doesn't like the politics. Same thing with the race bending. If you're dead set on making Peter and Tinkerbell not white, you can do that, but there ought to be a good reason for it, like the actors just brought something so special that you couldn't imagine anyone else playing these parts, and once people see the movie, you have no doubt that they're gonna win everybody over. Well, sorry, but you can't play that card here. I don't like picking on child actors. I'm sure they do their best, but I can't not do it in this case. The kid playing Peter is f***ing terrible. Peter Pan is supposed to be a charismatic dude, fun-loving, playful, whimsical, expressive, the kind of person you want to be around, the kind of person you'd believe the Darling kids would let whisk them off to Neverland, or that the Lost Boys would follow as their leader. This kid is just a fucking plank of wood. He has one facial expression, he can't emote to save his life, he barely smiles, he hardly ever looks like he's having fun, the entire movie hinges on him, and he might be the worst actor in the whole fucking thing. Meanwhile, Tinkerbell's role has been so reduced that her being a different color now is pretty much the only character trait she has. The fun personality, being enamored with Peter, that stuff is gone. She's there to throw pixie dust, and that's about it. So instead of updating her character, all you really did was take away the character she already had that everybody liked. She didn't gain something from being race bent, she lost something. Now, granted, the script didn't do these two any favors, but when you go out of your way to remove so much of the personality and whimsy that made Peter and Tinkerbell so lovable in the first place, and don't replace it with anything new, much less anything comparable to what you took out, all these versions of the characters have to hang their hats on is the race bending itself, which now stands out like a giant neon sign saying changing this just to change it, whether anyone likes it or not, was the only new idea we had. And then you wonder why the audience gets so sensitive and resentful about shit like this? And it's not just them. Tiger Lily's a similar situation. You wanted to be sure to depict the Indian characters in a not racist way? Yeah, I'm with you on that one. That's an update that needed to happen. And I guess the movie did that, but they also removed any reason for her to exist. Tiger Lily is there. She has maybe 3 or 4 lines. She has 0 character. She affects the plot in one scene, and then we see her in the climax whooping pirate ass because every female character has to be an uber badass now because anything less would be sexist. How original. And she's another thing that you could have cut right out and not even miss her. So congratulations, movie. The Indians aren't seen through a racist lens anymore. Now they're seen through a token one. Tiger Lily and her people aren't depicted offensively now, but they don't actually do anything either. They only exist because the filmmakers had to show how not racist they are. If they really gave a rat's ass about this, they would have given Tiger Lily an art, a personality, something to do, but there's just nothing there. And I think a lot of that, and other stuff like it, has to do with Wendy sucking up all the oxygen and having such a larger role in this one that there wasn't room for a lot of those other things, including Peter Pan himself at times. Yeah, how's that for irony? The first versions of Peter and Tinkerbell to be not white are also the ones who have their thunder stolen by Wendy. Interesting how that happened, isn't it? So Wendy gets a lot more focus this time, because we've got to make sure she's not just the love interest or the mother figure, God forbid. Now we've got to paint her with the badass brush so she can get in on the action too, whether that's believable or not. And, yeah, it's not. And it's hard to hate on Wendy too much because she's the only decent kid actor in the movie. The others aren't good at all. But at the same time, you really put her in a corner here because her role being so inflated comes at the cost of other characters being diminished or changed for the worse. John and Michael are non-entities. Tiger Lily barely does anything. The Lost Boys and girls are just background fodder. They might as well not even be there for all they get to do. And the biggest victim of this is Peter Pan himself, who in this movie is a piece of shit. I'm actually gonna talk about spoilers here, which I normally try not to do, but you shouldn't see this movie anyway, so who cares? The one update in the film that could have been interesting is the new backstory with Peter and Captain Hook. In this version, Hook, or James, was the first lost boy. Him and Peter were best friends until James started to miss his parents and wanted to go home, so Peter banished him from Neverland. Just put him on a sailboat and said GTFO. But I guess because the ocean is really f***ing big, James never made it home, never found his parents, eventually got found and adopted by pirates, and you can guess the rest. So Peter took this kid from his home, banished him when he wanted to go home, didn't help him get home, basically ruined this kid's whole life, cut off his hand when he came back, and now he acts as a thorn in James's side because James had the audacity to be angry about that. You, Peter Pan! You gigantic asshole! Now, in a different movie, a different story, one that understands how awful what Peter did is, really examines the consequences of it, and doesn't try to let him off the hook for it either, this might have been a compelling idea. But in a story that's traditionally been something innocent and aimed at kids, and is ultimately going to take Peter's side, it's fucking horrifying! And Peter offering up some half-hearted apology in the last 10 minutes doesn't make it any better. And neither does Jude Law, I'm sorry to say. He's the one really accomplished actor here, and he kind of phones it in. Even when they get to the backstory, which should humanize Captain Hook, and maybe it does, but they barely scratch the surface of the emotions he should be feeling, so even when they get to what should be a big cathartic moment about that stuff, it just falls flat. There are maybe one or two bits when you get a hint of the potential this idea could have had. Like Hook has a line at the end that, for anyone who's ever suffered from depression, that's gonna hit you pretty hard. Or it would have if they'd leaned into it more, but the movie just seems afraid to go where this idea should have organically taken them, and they don't explore it beyond just superficial stuff. If you really wanted to do it, you might as well have just gone all the way with it and made this a darker suspense type of movie with Peter being the surprise villain at the end. That kind of feels like what this idea should have led to, but Disney would never let you do that, so I guess we're out of luck. There are moments when they try to go darker and do some more alarming things that you might not expect, but these moments don't work because it's all just for shock value. They can't commit to any of it, and they can't reconcile the darker stuff with the whimsical origins of the story, and that just puts them in this awkward middle ground where the movie tries to be less fantasy and more realistic, but not all the time. And I think a lot of it just had to do with them not having the money to do more fantasy type stuff, but nothing comes off better this way. Neverland is supposed to be a magical, colorful, enchanting place, a place that's so charming and so wonderful it makes you believe the Lost Boys would rather live here than go home and grow up. This Neverland is just some drab, barren, colorless shithole. There's nothing magical about it. It's just an island. The Lost Boys live in a fucking cave, huddled around a fire with nothing to eat. We never once see them having fun or enjoying themselves, or even smiling for that matter. There's no charm here. This is a miserable existence Peter condemned them to. And the only reason it doesn't come off worse is because they don't get to express how they feel about this, because none of them are actual characters, or even really do much of anything at all. So by dialing back on the fantasy to make it more realistic, all you really did was suck all the joy and fun out of this situation. And that didn't do the technical side of things any good either. Speaking of stuff that got ruined by not having enough money, there are some shockingly bad green screen shots in this film. The VFX and the action are not good at all. The giant alligator appears in one scene and then it's never mentioned again. They CG'd it really badly too. It looked like late 90s, early 2000s CG. And that scene also comes off deliberately cartoony, which doesn't mesh at all with the rest of the film. Neverland doesn't look or feel like Neverland. The cave scene looks like a soundstage. The climax on the pirate ship looks like a soundstage. The fight choreography is awful. You have to make the pirates look like idiots to think the kids have any chance here, which works in a cartoon or a proper lighthearted fantasy setting, but if you want to make it more realistic, you can't have it both ways. Hook is the only competent one, and by the end, you're probably rooting for him more than Peter Pan, which sucks because he's the one who gets screwed over. The movie didn't have the money or the creative vision to be a real fantasy story, and it didn't have the balls, or I suspect the permission from Disney, to go as dark as the one potentially interesting idea they had seemingly needed them to either. So the whole thing is just a weird mishmash where the movie is kind of trying to be two opposing things at once and failing at both. Not to mention, you pushed a bunch of identity politics into it just so you could use all the woke stuff in the marketing campaign, when in actuality, notable female characters like Tinkerbell have less character now than they did in the animated movie the filmmakers were intent on updating. Tiger Lily is only there so they can show how not racist their movie is. Wendy's role was elevated so much that it felt more like her movie than Peter Pan's a lot of the time, and when the character the movie is supposed to be about isn't getting undercut by Wendy, he's just a little shit played by the worst actor on the damn screen! The spirit of the Peter Pan story is just not here. This is a soulless, joyless, melancholic movie that... Holy shit, I hate to make this comparison, but it kind of reminded me of Velma. And it's nowhere near as offensive as Velma is, I'm not saying that, but it is weirdly similar in that it embodies so many of the tropes I hate about modern entertainment, where some showbiz hack takes a property that's already beloved, and in this case, innocent, and in the name of deconstructing it or updating it, just ends up twisting it into something ugly and unrecognizable so you can't even enjoy it anymore. This is a fad that's only getting more and more infuriating, and sadly, I don't see it stopping anytime soon. Do yourself a favor, don't watch this movie. The original animated film may be problematic, but it's a lot more magical than this thing will ever be. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and while you're here, do all the other YouTube things. Ding the bell icon and follow my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. The links are down there. And most importantly, hit that thumbs up and leave a comment, share the video, subscribe, and make sure you're still subscribed, because what really deserves to have its whole life destroyed and its hand cut off by a petulant little asshole and yet is still made out to be the bad guy for some reason is the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now, but I'll be back with more soon. So take care, stay tuned, I'll see you next time.